I hope you enjoyed the first half of this conversation. This portion is the live technical interview with our guest. Feel free to follow along and create a solution of your own. All right, well, we are back. Mike, the ball's in your court here. I am ready to tackle a problem.
Okay, let me go ahead and let me find my notes here. Okay.
So before the podcast, we talked a little bit about palindrome, which is, check if something's a palindrome, which is something I actually did on a recent podcast episode that just went out. And you said that was a problem you've used in the past that you like because it has kind of a couple different approaches, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That one, I like. It's not too crazy, and there's a couple different ways to solve it. We can talk about it in both an iterative and a recursive approach. And, so it kind of lets me go in a couple of different ways depending on how the candidate approaches it. And I kind of like flexible problems with multiple solutions. Ones that have potentially naive solutions and ones that are more efficient. We can kind of talk through those and see how someone goes at them. It's anything where I've got some depth that I can work with. It's always better, I think.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm trying to get back to the. Oh, I know what it is. Hold on. What's this?
I think palindrome is probably one that I suggest everyone at least be familiar with, right? Have some type of idea, because that's when I was interviewing for my first job, I probably got asked that question 5 times in different interviews, and then some version of FizzBuzz, same thing. I would get asked that fairly frequently. And then there's like find the 2 numbers that add up to 10, some version of that type of question, which is like find a pair that equals this sum, hopefully without using nested loops. Those are the few that I saw pretty frequently.
Yep. And actually, I was going to do a variant on that one.
Cool.
So I won't start with the 2 numbers, although maybe we do, and then we'll move into mine. It kind of forms a good basis, and I kind of look at this one like palindrome because there's a couple different ways to solve it, and then we can kind of add to the complexity. And for some companies, at Google, the coding interviews, they typically start a little like a simple problem, and then they start to layer on other challenges to it. There was one I had to implement a reverse proxy type of function, I believe. Kind of doing this from memory because it was like 10 or 12 years ago. But it was like, okay, well, what about this if you had this scenario? How would you layer that into this function? Stuff like that. So it's typical that you start with something simple, and then maybe it gets enlarged the further you go. So
yeah. I think a lot of take-home problems now, I've seen that trend where it's similar, but usually it's a pretty, it's simple-ish question, a little bit more complicated, and then the actual hard question is the third one. Maybe their scale isn't as good of a ramp up.
Yeah, and there it's the scoring system like at Google for coding is kind of crazy and stuff. So it's still subjective. They have all these ways to normalize people's different scoring approaches and stuff like that. But yeah, they tend to get, nitpicky. So like one mistake's not going to sink you. It's just more like the cumulative
Sure.
that add up there. So, but I'm trying to find, there it is. Okay. So I'll put it in chat here.
Great.
And then hold on, let me get the numbers though. When Zoom goes full screen, okay, there we go. And then so that's the first part, and then the second part.
That's a particular value. Okay, great. Let me pull this over. And this would be our first example.
Yeah. We'll make it a little bit more interesting after this first part, since it sounds like you've done this kind of problem before.
Yes. So can you can see this screen at least somewhat? Might be hard to see the exact letters.
No, I got it now.
Okay, great. So given a list of numbers, you find the 2 numbers that sum up to a particular value. And the goal here is to sum it up to 22. So if our input looked like uh, this, right, then our output would be, looking at this one, would be 12 and 10.
Mm-hmm.
And do you want the index of those numbers or the numbers themselves?
The numbers themselves.
Numbers themselves. Okay, great. And this is, let's see, at least the hash syntax is it an array or a hash? It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It can be. Um, I'd say for this, let's go ahead and just say it's an array.
Okay, great, great.
I think arrays are a little bit more straightforward to work with for this kind of problem.
Sorry, what's that?
I was saying I think arrays are a little simpler to work with for this kind of problem, but
Yes.
it's it's marginal.
Great. So looking at this, my first thought would be, my approach would be to make a hash where I'm going to add each of these numbers and then have the target number where if basically then the target number minus the current number target number minus the current number that I'm kind of working through in the hash um, exists within the hash, then I will return both those numbers. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. So let's see. Trying to think of any other edge cases. Typically, I don't do like checking for a nil input or anything. I'm just using the example, whether it's something that we would do if we were gonna use this in production, right?
Yeah. And typically, I think that's a good kind of point out those sorts of things when you're doing something like this.
Yes.
Because like I'm not a to write a real production function, you've got to put a lot of guardrails and stuff like that on it.
Yes.
But that's not necessarily what we're trying to do here. So I think it's good to point that out. And if the interviewer really wants to see that, they should tell you, or that may be
Yes.
something you add in. So
I used to never point that out, and then I got called on it once or twice by people saying, "Oh, you're missing your nil checks." I'm like, "Oh, I don't,
yeah,
don't usually do that."
normally like I'll ask a question. If this was something that I was asked, it would be like, am I going to have? Do I need to worry? Do I care about negatives? Not that it should really matter for this. Do I care about nils or any incorrect input, or am I going to get valid input always? So
Yes. Okay. So we've got a function set up here. We're just going to take in our input array, and then we have our target number. So we can use a for loop. Let's create our hash equals this. I'm going to say let results equals array. You want this? Is it good if we return it as an array with those two numbers?
oh yeah, that's fine actually.
Okay, great. So creating an empty hash that we're going to loop through our input array and then add the numbers to that. I'm creating a results empty array, which is where I'll put the two numbers that I'll add up for that. Okay, so zero, let I is less than the input dot length, and then plus equal 1. People giving me crap too for the way I do my
It's not,
increments.
it's funny. When you wrote that, I was like, that's an interesting way to do that. Yeah, because I mean, I would normally just do I plus plus.
Yeah, I don't know what it was about the plus plus. I think it was coming from Ruby, and then trying to do JavaScript for the first time, it like confused me just the way that it worked. So then I never did it, and then now I'm stuck.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because I typically work in JVM languages in Java, Kotlin and Scala, but like the number of times that I write like a for loop nowadays with this way is pretty rare. So it's
Yeah.
it's just interesting how the language has changed over the years.
Yes. Like down in my syntax here, but if basically we're saying if hash does not include input array I, which would be basically this first number that we're looping through here, then hash input array I equals true. So I'm just going to check that should give hash. Hash should spit out all our numbers if I've done that correctly.
Okay.
All the numbers in our input array with true associated with them. Let's see. I used to do all my technicals in JavaScript because that's what I was the most comfortable in. And then I've started using Ruby more than JavaScript at work. So it's fun, like you said, trying to go back and forth between the two.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I'm currently operating mostly in Java and JavaScript, and specifically like ES6. And it can get a little weird at times. Like I'll start to write something like, wait, I'm in the wrong IDE right now for this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Okay, great. So this is what I expected, which is we have a hash which is displayed with all of our results in it. The undefined is because console.log doesn't actually return anything right now.
yeah.
Okay, great. So that's what I expected. And then if it's in there, that's great. Now all of those are in there. So in my head, we would use a second for loop to basically see if I should have written it down when I said it because it's hard for me to keep straight in my head. But if the current input minus the target, I guess, if the target number minus the current item, current array element is included exist in the hash, then we're going to add the current element I think of the right way to basically add that other element into the array as well. But
Do you do you need to add it in at that point, or
just so we return both of these.
well, you'd have them, wouldn't you?
Yes, I think so. I'm just trying to think of the right way to call the current element would be represented as J if I just do another for loop, which I'll add J into a result and then Oh, the other element would just be represented as array input target number minus current array element. Does that logic track?
I think so.
Okay, great.
If I understood it all, yes, I think so.
Yes. Okay. This is, I feel like a thing that I've learned is I'll say stuff, and then if I don't write it down later when I'm going to actually try to do it, I'm like, I don't, I
Yeah.
don't know if I remember what I said. Right. So. Okay.
Well, I mean, I think it's a good call out though, like especially for folks that are still relatively like early on and just in writing, translating like the algorithm in their head into code. Do whatever helps. Like if it helps to write it out in English or pseudocode or whatever, and then translate it, whatever helps you get to that final product the best. Um, you know, the I mean, the worst thing to do is try to just keep it all in your head, thinking you got to be able to think it all,
Yeah,
and then
something.
translate that directly into code. I think that a lot of people get caught up in that, and it hurts them. So
Absolutely. Something a coding bootcamp instructor that I had, Peter Jang, he said your ability to kind of keep code within your head grows the more you are a programmer. Like you can just keep more kind of running at once in your head, right? Because like in early on, it's very limited, and I had like a very real example of that when I was at a job early on where I was just trying to basically make a download button appear on a page that we had built, and I was like, I have to make a method, I have to make a new route, I have to do like all these things, and I was just repeating it out loud over and over again while I was working through it. So I was like, so I don't forget any of these pieces. But I could feel like, okay, now I've got the capacity to do that a little bit better. But
yeah,
it's hard to quantify that as a skill, but it's something that I think is difficult to do, especially early on.
yeah. Well, and it just gets it. For some people, it's more natural, and for some people, it takes a little bit longer to kind of learn that skill. And
Yes.
it just depends. But just getting it working is usually one. Getting it all out there and working is the first step. And then you can kind of feel like, oh, I don't really have to go through it this many times, or I could short circuit here and stuff. But the old adage of premature optimization is the root of all evil is it can be true.
Yes. Yes. Okay. I'm trying to make sure I write this correctly. If hash input array j, which would be current element, and minus target number. So if we're saying 12, well, it would be 22 minus 12. So this should say if 10 exists in this hash, I believe that's what my code is reading, then I'm going to results.push input array j, and then input array j minus target number, and then I have return result right here. I believe this should work. Right now it doesn't check at all for if there's no results. Oh boy.
Yeah, something feels off in that check to me.
If hash
Maybe not. This is where like I've got my Java hat on and I've got to read this
yes.
as JavaScript.
This could be incorrect syntax. I don't think I need a true there either. Oh, I don't want a true there.
A single equal sign is sign.
Oh, right, right. I don't think I want. Yeah, I don't want that either. Let's see, input array.
One thing I usually tell, or one thing, not even so much a hint at this point, but like the suggestion I give is usually like, why don't you walk through it with a couple of examples? You've got your example array and kind of just walk yourself through the code.
Mhm.
And you can either just walk through it manually in your head, or you could throw some console statements in there, depending on whichever is easier, and see what's not tripping, basically.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So I think I just have the syntax incorrectly for how basically like I might need to add J individually and then minus target number individually. So I want to see if
What do you think
what
that test should be doing?
I think this should be doing is basically checking if J, which in the first element in this array would be 12, minus the target number should be 22.
So you're going to have J, which is going to be 0 initially. And in this case, you're going to be grabbing it as an index, not as a key in the dictionary.
Correct.
So J will be 0. And so that would give you the first number, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So what?
So what would hash z? What input array in this case would be? So that would be what, 12?
Yes.
Okay.
So hash 12. Yeah. I'm trying to think if I. 12 minus target number. Say if this spits out. Let's see. Around that. Negative 21. It's not really expected to see there.
So tell me what hash, so input array J, your first pass through. What's input array J?
Hash input array J.
Well, just input array J. Let's start there.
Input array J. Oh, I thought it would be 12.
Okay.
That was my.
And then you're going to say the hash of the 12th, hash of 12, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then what would what would the value of hash of 12? Because you built that hash and it was a key value of basically key and true. And so if it doesn't exist, you get false, but the number should be in there, so it'd be true. But what would true minus target would be?
Right. It's not going to be what we want it to be. Right. So
let me ask you this question. Do you need that hash that you built?
Yeah. I don't.
Why?
I don't know. Because I think what I want to check is, well, actually not this input. I want it flipped, right? As target number minus this.
Okay.
I want to check if 10 is in that hash.
Yep. Okay.
Right. So if So can I pull this in here? Where if hash, if hash 10, might have one too many. Okay, so I was trying to check for if hash input array j, my subtraction was not working well. Let me make sure I fully understand. It's backwards. So input array. Oh, I was trying to subtract the target number from input array. Basically, input array minus target number, which doesn't.
Yeah. Well, like in line 21, you were subtracting the target number from the index because you were
Correct.
just, your J was the index of 0 to the length of the array.
Yes.
And so, and then you were saying dereference, give me the value of the slot in the input array of that index. And so, yeah, that was.
Yes. Oops. There we go. Okay, so if we take out console.log, we get two undefined. I don't want those. Oh, I don't.
Yeah, you're pushing in JavaScript. What's the syntax of push? If you give you
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, you're in JavaScript because this is JavaScript is not like it's fluent. The if you call push with two parameters, does it pass both? Does it push both parameters into the array?
Oh, good question. I thought so. I believe so, but let's check because that's an assumption I made that I'm not 100% sure what the output would be. Let's see. Oops.
Oh, you're not returning. Yeah. I'll help you out there.
Important, right? A little hint.
It's funny. I haven't done these. It's been 6 months since I've really done these, and I sometimes have to catch myself from getting too helpful because I kind of think of it as like okay, we're both working on this thing. No, I can only get you a little bit. And ultimately, you've got to go through it. There you go.
Am I?
But why are you getting both numbers?
I don't know. I think this is my issue.
No. So I know. I throw a throw a throw a console.log into that array, into that loop, and just
For input array J.
yeah.
Oh, because I just need to push it when this is true. And I was trying to push two different things when that was true.
Well, basically, you're finding both directions of the tuple.
Yeah.
Versus
Interesting.
exiting when you find the first.
Right. That's interesting because it's not it's not the behavior I was expecting. So if I pulled this, I still don't think I'm calling this correctly though, because it returns undefined. I may have the same target number. Oh, yeah. So I think I could do the same thing if I flip these. Okay. Get rid of that one. And then I return after that. I believe that'll also give us 10. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. And just to check that I'm not crazy, I thought that would work. Let's see. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So it's one of those things where it's like there's all these kind of nice, fun shortcuts in ES6 these days that I've had
Yeah.
to kind of learn as I got back into the language, and where it'll sometimes convert like uh, multiple parameters into an array, or you've got the triple dot syntax and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So it's a much nicer language to work in, but I still find myself like having to look up some of the new features. So um, going back to that real quick though, one question I had for you is, could
Yes.
you could you optimize that to be able to do it in a single pass?
Probably. Let's see. So the way I do it now is I add them all and then I loop through them all a second time. So right, if my non-computer science background, big O, notation is correct, this would be, so I'm using two different loops, basically O of n plus m.
Yeah, I mean it would still be the same big O, I believe. God, it's been a while
Yeah.
since I thought. But the what is it there? But you could still keep yourself from having to loop through it twice, basically.
Yes. Um, I believe if I could probably add an else block here, right? I'm trying to think it through in my head, but if I added else or maybe an else if, that checks if basically if this input array I, it's the same type of check, this input array I minus the target number exists in the array below.
If you look at the input array,
Yeah.
let's say my target number was 15.
Mm-hmm.
In an ideal world, you'd only have to check the first two parameters.
Yeah.
Yeah. That might have been what you were saying just now, actually. I might not have heard it all now that I think about it.
Yeah, let me, let's pull this down here. I think my concern with doing it in one loop was that I would end up potentially missing one if it came later. But I think using this same type of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
If hash target number, like else. Oh, I'm trying to think the best way to do it. I probably want it up there, but it is in JavaScript else if. There we go. Trying to think of the way to do that if I'm missing any potentially. Is this what you were thinking? Something like this?
Well, let's walk through that code and see. So, if what I typically like to do here is you can look at it a couple different ways. I guess is one, you probably want to work through the input array for both those targets and see if it works. Just kind of mentally working through it.
Yeah.
But then also it's like, what do I need to do? Like in the case of 15, like if 12, if I see 12, well, 12 I can't. Obviously, I don't have another number, so I've got to put that.
Mm-hmm.
I need to put it into the hash. And I see the second number, and you see my target's 15, so 15 minus 3, and then does that number exist? And then if it does exist, then I've got my found. If not, I just add that number to the hash and move to the next one.
Right. It makes more sense to have like this needs to be the top one, right? Or the first condition that's checked. And then if that's not true, then we're just going to basically add this. Oops. But we always want to run that check first, because even if it's the second one,
Yeah.
See. So by default, we're going to add it if this top one doesn't trigger. If the top one does trigger, we can do something like, oh. I was just saying, right? Something like that, where we want to do that same type of check we were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's true, then add that. Else, we're just going to keep adding numbers to the array.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think if that would cause us to miss. I think that's what my concern was at first. If we would, I guess we can walk through with an example, right? If let's do this one, because this one I don't know would work immediately. So 12 will run through, it will get added to our hash. 3 will go through. The sum we're looking for is 10. So it'll trigger the else. It'll get added to the hash. The 4 will do the same. The 1 will do the same. The 6 will do the same. And then the 10 would trigger it. I'm trying to think of an example that I'm not sure if it would work if well, I think that would work, because it should be the same.
Run that and see what it is.
We're going to get several results here. So we got 10, 12, which is the same result we got for the top one. And we had 3, 12, 12, 3, which those are both what we would like. Yeah, I think my concern was that if one came early and then we worked our way through, we might miss it. But I think I'm thinking more of a 2 pointers type of situation than a hash situation, because if we're subtracting the target number, then we should always be checking previous ones. Like, we're not going to be skipping over any. I think if we're using arrays, it wouldn't work.
Yeah. And it's funny, when I went out to look at this, when I saw that your previous one had done the palindrome, I went out and like, well, I've always liked this one. I went out to get some example numbers and stuff. I Googled that one, and I don't think I'd actually seen the 2 pointers approach. Like I've seen the naive approach, which is just a couple of nested for loops, and then I had jumped immediately to the hash solution. So yeah, I saw the 2 pointers and stuff. So basically, like at that point, I looked for like, do they see the short circuit and stuff or not? For me, seeing the short circuit is not like, if they can't see it, it's not a huge red flag. Because like I said, it's one of those things where it's hard for me to determine whether or not that will make them a great teammate sometimes if they don't have but they can take a hint and work through it. Then it starts to tell me, do they take input? Do they listen to input? And that's a bigger, like, if someone doesn't listen to the hint or the advice or work through it, and they just want to put their head down, that's actually a bigger red flag than not knowing how to do that.
Yeah, and So two follows. So when you say short circuit, do you mean like basically adding a return here rather than at the end of the function?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So like basically being able to do that in a single pass, because like you were looking at like I need to build up the list of numbers in this
Mhm.
hash that I could easily just do a big O1 lookup on, like a hash lookup. Whereas though, if you found the right answer early on, why continue going through it? So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Great. And then the other thing that came to mind was, another thing that I realized how important it is, especially when learning on the job, was, like often, my lead may know the answer, or my manager, but doesn't necessarily want to tell me, here's the answer, right? And be like, oh, maybe look in this direction, right? Which is like, at first was something that was, somewhat frustrating to me, but now I realize like, oh, that skill set of being like, wait, I think I got to figure it out. It's in this area, and then going down that path, and then actually be able to figure it out. Like that makes stuff cement in my brain so much better than, or so much more than just here's how to do it, right? And I might forget that immediately after I implement it if it's just here's the answer.
yeah. Well, and like what I'll do sometimes as well is ask questions, even if I know the answer to them, like almost make you teach me.
Sure.
Because teaching is one of the best ways to master something.
Yeah.
So having to dig into something and learn how to teach it makes you really understand it. So
Yeah.
they use that in schools too. Is they have some of the students that are maybe know something help teach it to the ones that don't, because it actually forges even better mastery in the ones that have some of
Oh, that was every math class I took in high school.
it.
Was someone helping me when the teacher was busy teaching everyone else.
So yeah,
uh, Great.
cool.
Well, Mike, as we come to a close here, anything else that you'd like to share with folks, or a plug for yourself? I know it sounds like you're hiring at Torch.
Oh, I'm definitely hiring. You know, it's a beginning where um, we're just starting to build out now, so there's a lot of opportunity for being able to set that initial architecture, if you will, the initial platform itself, helping influence the culture, like helping build a healthy um, development culture. And if you've never done that, it's a fun thing to do. So yeah, and if you're comfortable working and where things aren't already set, it can be a really good experience. So
Yeah, and from I'll I'll add on some praise here from the business side. Proven founder who's done it multiple times in the past, got some capital funding from, I think, very strategic people that are actually useful rather than just anyone. And I think those are, and then in the right city, right, for for freight tech with the right
yeah,
connections, which is huge in that industry.
yeah. Well, and it's funny when you asked earlier, you made a comment about asking someone, why did you go there or something?
Mhm.
One of the things that interested me was because Chicago is a logistics town.
Yeah.
There's a ton of logistics startups and other just logistics companies that are very established. And so I was interested to kind of get some exposure to that as well. But yeah, our founders have been around the block many times. His whole career is pretty much logistics. So
Yeah. I built an entire recruiting career around logistics and tech logistics. My first placement ever was at a tech logistics company. My last placement was at a tech logistics company. So it's been many years. Great. Well, Mike, it's been a blast. Thanks so much for being on the show.
yeah, thanks. It was fun.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcasting app at the Professional Technical Interviewee. I want to thank my guest and my wonderful editor and producer, Dustin Bays. If you're interested in sharing your technical interview advice and being on the show, please reach out at dorsetttaylordev@gmail.com. Until next time, keep practicing.